Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. I trust you're having a restful weekend, and for those who celebrate it, I wish you all a happy Easter weekend. Today's episode is a big episode. We have a lot to cover. We discuss the risks of systemic collapse in the housing system and wider banking system in the second half of the video. Viewers can use the chapter feature to skip to that part of the video if they wish. But first up, yesterday, Friday, the White House revised rules aimed at making it harder for China to access US artificial intelligence chips and chip-making tools, part of ongoing technology competition and decoupling. The initial rules, released in October, seek to halt shipments to China of more advanced AI chips designed by NVIDIA. The new rules, which run 166 pages in length, go into effect on Thursday next week. They clarify, for example, that restrictions on chip shipments to China also apply to laptops containing those chips. The Commerce Department said it will continue updating its restrictions on technology shipments to China to prevent Beijing from using AI technology in military applications. However, this week Beijing opened a new front, employing AI in its narrative war with the West. This week, state-run broadcaster CGTN launched in English an animated series called A Fractured America, written, voiced, and animated entirely with artificial intelligence. The theme of the series is that the US is in terminal decline. The videos invoke ideas of a dystopian society, such as American workers in turmoil and America's military-industrial complex. The visuals are obviously AI-generated, and the voice still sounds uncanny. But in just a few years, who knows how convincing these videos will become, and how powerful a weapon they will be in Beijing's toolbox. Traditionally, anti-Western rhetoric from China was notorious for being cringy and poorly composed, but with AI-generated content, the quality of these campaigns have increased dramatically. And why wouldn't it? The West has a rich tradition of self-criticism. Some would argue it's a great strength of the West. However, AI can now consume all of this and reproduce the criticism in coordinated narrative campaigns from state media. Qatar-based Al Jazeera writes this week that the Fractured America series is just one example of how artificial intelligence, with its ability to generate high-quality multimedia with minimal effort in seconds, is beginning to shape Beijing's propaganda efforts to undermine the United States' standing in the world. Henry Edger, a UK-based expert in generative AI, told the outlet that while the CGTN series does not attempt to pass itself off as genuine video, it is a clear example of how AI has made it far easier and cheaper to churn out content. Quote, "The reason that they've done it in this way is you could hire an animator and a voiceover artist to do this, but it would probably end up being more time-consuming. It would probably end up being more expensive to do. This is a cheaper way to scale content creation. When you can put together all these various modules, you can generate images, you can animate those images, you can generate just video from scratch, you can generate pretty compelling, pretty human-sounding text-to-speech. So you have the whole content creation pipeline automated, or at least highly synthetically generated." End quote. In a report last year, Microsoft's Threat Analysis Center said AI has made it easier to produce viral content and more difficult to identify when material has been produced by a state actor. The Microsoft report said that PRC state-backed actors have been developing AI-generated content since at least March 2023, and such, quote, "relatively high-quality visual content has already drawn high levels of engagement from authentic social media users," end quote. Adding, quote, "In the past year, China has honed a new capability to automatically generate images it can use for influence operations meant to mimic US voters across the political spectrum and create controversy along racial, economic, and ideological lines. This new capability is powered by artificial intelligence that attempts to create high-quality content that could go viral across social networks in the US and other democracies," end quote. And the scale is incredible. The Microsoft report identified more than 230 state media employees posing as social media influencers, with the capacity to reach 103 million people in at least 40 languages. Common themes included the rise of China and US collapse. And it's not just the US being targeted. According to Taiwan-based The Taipei Times, citing national security sources, in the run-up to January's Taiwan election, more than 100 deep-fake videos of fake news anchors attacking outgoing Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen were attributed to Beijing's Ministry of State Security. Next up, we move to the Chinese economy. But before we do, there is something I wanted to bring up. This will not apply to the vast majority of regular viewers, but it is worth briefly discussing here. Recently, I've received some comments or emails of people complaining that there are both negative and positive news stories covered in China Update. They'll ask me things like, what is your deal? Is this positive coverage or is this negative coverage? I normally tell this very small group of viewers that the real world is not a Disney film with clear narratives. There is good news, bad news, and ugly news every day. This channel only seeks to follow the news, to better understand what is happening in China through grounded and sober analysis. It is not here to cherry-pick good or bad. Now, I don't need to tell this to regular viewers, of course, but to that small group that cannot stand watching a video that has both positive and negative news in it, I would ask, are you watching this channel because you want to follow what is happening on the ground in China, or are you seeking entertainment and punditry? If you are seeking the former, then my promise to you is that I will always endeavour to provide the most accurate picture of what is happening on the ground, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. But if it is the latter, then this is probably not the channel for you. And for everyone else, my promise remains the same: to follow this country the best we can with grounded and sober analysis. Now, with that said, let's continue. If you're enjoying today's episode, as always, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Subscribing is also a big help for regular viewers who have not yet done so. China Update relies primarily on subscriber support to keep going, rather than corporate sponsorship, and I'd like to keep it that way. If you'd also like to help keep this channel primarily subscriber supported, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This does help me continue producing these videos free and open 6 days a week. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, we move to the Chinese economy and we discuss two very different Chinese companies. Chinese networking and electronics firm Huawei has seen a strong comeback after being almost crippled by US sanctions. The technology giant reported net profit of about 13.9 billion yuan, $1.9 billion US, in the December quarter, an impressive 65% jump year-on-year. UK-based The Financial Times observes that the results underscore how Huawei, the target of US sanctions and export controls for years, has progressed in navigating through the challenges. Quote, in August, the company unveiled its flagship Mate 60 smartphone lineup with a domestically designed and produced 7nm processor, setting off a wave of popularity at home. Its consumer electronics division surged 17.3% in 2023 to bring sales in of 251.5 billion yuan. End quote. US-based Bloomberg writes, quote, Huawei, which was almost kicked out of smartphones and chip-making after the US cut it off from overseas suppliers in 2019, is emerging as a symbol of China's determination to thwart Washington's curbs. It's now building a network of chip-making plants to underpin its longer-term ambitions in arenas such as electric vehicles and artificial intelligence. End quote. The company's cloud computing arm grew by nearly 22% during the year, as it made further inroads in competing with Alibaba and Tencent Holdings Limited domestically. The company's chips are also showing up in the systems of Chinese AI developers. Huawei, enjoying a powerful combination of state backing, a nationalistic consumer base, and a highly talented workforce, has also bitten deeply into Apple's China market share. Earlier this week, we covered the news that iPhone shipments in China fell about 33% in February from a year earlier. So, this is the first company, a national technology champion, doing very well and challenging established players at home and abroad. The second company's outlook is far less rosy. In a surprise announcement late Thursday, Country Garden Holdings Co. Limited, one of China's biggest property developers, warned it will miss a deadline for reporting annual results, a huge red flag for the property builder and the wider sector. The developer said that it will not make the March 31st deadline imposed by regulators. The deadline will likely result in a suspension of trading on the 2nd of April, when the Hong Kong market reopens after Easter Sunday. Bloomberg intelligence analyst Christy Hung writes today that the earnings delay, quote, suggests new impediments to its restructuring, with any delays to its debt plan likely to fuel concerns of lawsuit risk. End quote. Country Garden, a firm bigger than Evergrande and previously believed to be relatively healthy, is facing yet another tough year. Recent corporate filings show contract sales for February plunged 85% from a year earlier, widening from a 75% slide in January. As we have discussed in previous videos, the housing crisis looks to deepen this year. This, combined with the local fiscal crisis, are the dual albatrosses around the neck of the Chinese economy. UK-based Reuters reports that the focus is turning to China Wanke Co. Limited, too, a state-backed builder looking at default. Wanke reported late Thursday that net income plunged 46%. The giants of housing development, responsible for millions of units, are on the verge of collapse. Indeed, the entire system would collapse with it. Beijing will not let this happen. In fact, its state control is the only thing preventing full collapse of the entire housing sector. But preventing it is coming at a huge cost. And of course, the systemic nature of this places pressure on other sectors in the wider economic and financial system. Meanwhile, US outlet Bloomberg reports this week on how China's protracted property downturn is eroding the balance sheets of the nation's largest state banks as their bad loans creep up. The financial side of this crisis is much scarier than the housing one. On Wednesday, Bank of Communications Co. reported that its property bad loan ratio jumped to a very high 4.99% as of the end of last year, from 2.8% a year earlier, almost a doubling. While the balance of its overdue mortgages slipped, the special mention loans for the segment, a leading indicator of soured loans, jumped 23% to 9.88 billion yuan, $1.4 billion. Bloomberg reports that bigger rival Industrial and Commercial Bank of China Limited saw its bad loans for residential mortgages rise 9.6% to 27.8 billion yuan, also according to a Wednesday filing. In the corporate loans segment, its property non-performing loan ratio was the highest among all sectors. Agricultural Bank of China Limited reported a 4.7% increase in soured residential mortgage loans last year, while NPL ratio for the property sector also topped other industries. Beijing analysts observed, quote, "The nation's largest state-owned banks are struggling to maintain growth as Beijing tasks them with duties to help pump up the domestic economy, as well as rescue its debt-laden property developers and local governments. The state banks have so far heeded Beijing's call to lower lending rates and step up financing support for developers." End quote. China's home prices deepened in February in both new and used home segments, underscoring the challenge for authorities to salvage the beleaguered market. Quote, "The big lenders' profitability and asset quality are in focus as investors await to gauge their resilience in an economy that's heavily reliant on bank lending to regain momentum. Combined profits at China's commercial banks rose 3.2% to 2.38 trillion yuan last year, the slowest pace since 2020, according to official data. Outstanding bad loans climbed to a record 3.23 trillion RMB. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a great weekend, and I will see you all on Monday.